Resident Evil Veronica just confirmed something huge that will change everyone's expectations for the game moving forward. At an invite-only event at the Playdays portion of Summer Game Fest, several gaming journalists were able to attend a Q&A with Resident Evil Veronica's producer, Yoshiaki Hirabayashi, and they were able to gather some pretty eye-opening bits on the direction that this game is headed. So in this video, we'll be talking about all the new info from Hirabayashi to give you a clearer picture of what this game is fleshing out to be. So with that said, let's get right into it. So let's start with the hard facts of development, because the team handling this project tells us everything we need to know about its quality and direction. Hirabayashi has officially confirmed that Resident Evil Veronica is being developed by the exact same highly acclaimed development team behind the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 remakes. This is actually massive news. It means the game is not being outsourced to a secondary team, nor is it being treated as a spin-off. In fact, Capcom explicitly emphasized a critical point that fans have been screaming for decades. They view Code Veronica as a fully mainline core entry in the series, carrying just as much weight as any numbered title. One of the first major details cleared up by Hirabayashi is the title itself. Moving forward, Capcom is shifting its primary naming style for Resident Evil titles toward a Resident Evil plus word format, rather than relying on letters or convoluted subtitles. Stripping away the code and leaving it as Resident Evil Veronica made the most thematic sense for this specific reimagining. Furthermore, Hirabayashi put a swift end to internet speculation regarding the logo and branding. Many fans noticed that the stylized lettering of Resident Evil Veronica could be read as REV or RE5. Prompting theories that this was a cleverly hidden Roman numeral for a Resident Evil 5 connection, or a Resident Evil Revelations tie-in. The producer directly shot this down, stating that REV is not meant to represent a Roman numeral of 5 or any hidden code. It is simply Veronica. He said it's meant to just be a cute reference to it being the 5th RE game that Capcom has remade. When the initial reveal trailer dropped, the horror community was sent into a frenzy by footage shot from a first-person perspective, leading to intense speculation that Capcom might be returning to the gameplay style of Resident Evil 7 and Village. Hirabayashi used this Q&A to completely clarify their presentation strategy. The first-person viewpoint used in the reveal trailer was strictly for cinematic and promotional purposes to build tension for the announcement. The actual game is strictly a third-person over-the-shoulder experience. There will be no first-person mode in the entire main game. The way this scene plays out in the final product will differ substantially from what press and fans saw in the teaser, hinting that the scene as presented might not even appear in the final game at all, or will be experienced through a completely different narrative context. In an era where modern games are often criticized for artificially extending their runtimes for meaningless quests and empty open spaces, Capcom is taking a firm stance with Veronica. The development team explicitly stated that they do not believe longer equals better. To them, high-quality, dense, and terrifying content is vastly more important than padding out the game's length. While the original Code Veronica was a massive sweeping adventure that spanned 2 distinct global locations, the remake will focus heavily on tight pacing, atmospheric dread, and meaningful progression, ensuring that every room, puzzle, and enemy encounter serves as a deliberate purpose to the horror design. A major portion of the developer Q&A focused on the game's central protagonist, Claire Redfield. Hirabayashi confirmed that Resident Evil Veronica is primarily Claire's story. While other characters play monumental roles, she is the emotional anchor and primary perspective of the entire game. One of the most revealing pieces of information regarding the gameplay direction is that Veronica will play much more like Resident Evil 2 Remake than the action-heavy Resident Evil 4 Remake and Leon portion of Resident Evil 9. We're not getting a kung fu backflipping suplexing version of Claire Redfield. In Resident Evil 4, Leon S. Kennedy was a highly trained government agent operating as a one-man army. Claire, by contrast, is a survivor. The developers emphasize that part of Claire's massive appeal to the global fanbase is her strong sense of humanity. She is vulnerable, she feels pain, and she reacts to the horrors around her with genuine human emotion, rather than stoic action hero bravado. To justify this gameplay style, the developers reminded fans of where Veronica sits on the official timeline. The events of this game take place a mere 3 months after Claire escaped the absolute nightmare of Raccoon City in Resident Evil 2. Think about that from a psychological perspective. Claire is only 19 years old during these events. While she has experienced a localized biohazard once before, and while she does possess basic self-defense and firearms training passed down from her brother Chris, She has not had years of military and tactical training. She hasn't become a seasoned bioterrorism operative yet. Therefore, in the Veronica remake, Claire will not be a radically different or physically overpowered character compared to her appearance in Raccoon City. The developers noted that instead of being physically stronger, her growth will manifest as being more mentally resilient. She knows what zombies are now. She understands the concept of a bioweapon. She is driven by a fierce determination to find her brother, which gives her the psychological fortitude to push through horrific situations. But her physical capabilities remain grounded. Despite the heavy focus on Claire, an introductory video shown exclusively to members of the press heavily emphasized that the unbreakable bond between the Redfield siblings, Chris and Claire, remains at the absolute core of Veronica's narrative structure. The game is a journey of rescue and reunion. Simultaneously, this press presentation highlighted that the return of Albert Wesker is a massive focal point for the timeline. Veronica is the turning point where Wesker transitions from a presumed dead traitor into a superhuman god-complex mastermind operating from the shadows. Balancing Claire's grounded survival story with the larger-than-life rivalry between Chris and Wesker is one of the most delicate acts that the writers are tackling. Perhaps the most shocking and exciting revelation from Hirabayashi is the narrative philosophy guiding this remake. The producer confirmed that Capcom is going to be incredibly aggressive in changing the narrative beats, character arcs, and specific events of Code Veronica. This will not be a one-to-one recreation with prettier graphics. While past remakes have altered layouts and streamlined plots, Veronica is undergoing a massive transformative reimagining. Hirabayashi specifically noted that they are not outright cutting iconic scenes or environments, but fans should expect things to be heavily shifted, recontextualized, and transformed to a degree far beyond what we saw in the previous Capcom remakes. To understand why an aggressive overhaul is necessary, we have to look at the villains of the game, the aristocratic declining Ashford dynasty. When asked directly how the remake team plans to handle Alfred Ashford, a character who, in the 2000 original, was defined by campy, over-the-top voice acting, hysterical laughing, and a highly controversial psychological twist involving identity switching. Which, by the way, just keep him a fucking crossdresser. It's literally ingrained in his character by this point. But Hirabayashi did give an insightful answer of how he plans to tackle this. Before diving in, the producer clarified that because the game is still actively in development, some specific elements are not 100% finalized. However, the overarching creative goal is set in stone. Veronica must be a horror experience first. Hirabayashi explained that every entry in the Resident Evil franchise leans into a different subgenre of horror. Resident Evil 7 was backwoods, visceral grindhouse horror. Resident Evil 4 was tense, overwhelming survival action dread. For Resident Evil Veronica, the specific type of horror Capcom is leaning into is the darkness inside human hearts and minds. The developers believe that more than almost any other game in the entire franchise, Veronica is a story focused entirely on intense, distorted human emotion. Specifically, it explores the concept of love when it's pushed too far. Instead of treating Alfred Ashford as a caricatured, laughing villain, the remake is going deep into the psychological darkness of his heart. A darkness that stems entirely from his toxic, codependent, and isolated love for his twin sister, Alexia. The team is currently ironing out the specific narrative mechanics, but players should prepare for a version of Alfred that is tragic, profoundly unsettling, mentally fractured, and genuinely terrifying rather than campy. By shifting the focus to psychological horror and the darkness of the human heart, the remake has a golden opportunity to tie the events of Rockford Island and Antarctica into the deepest, darkest lore of the Resident Evil universe. In the original lore, the Ashfords were one of the founding families of Umbrella, alongside Oswald E. Spencer and James Marcus. However, while Spencer gained total control of the company, the Ashfords fell from grace, viewed as eccentric failures. This pushed Alfred and Alexia's father, Alexander, to conduct horrific genetic experiments, cloning the family's brilliant ancestor, Veronica Ashford, to create the perfect twins. By focusing on the psychological trauma of Alfred, the remake can explore the horrifying reality of being born as a genetic experiment designed solely to restore a broken family legacy. Alfred's descent into madness isn't just a quirky character trait, he's the direct result of isolation, parental neglect, abuse, and the crushing weight of an aristocratic empire built on blood and bioweapons. This aggressive reimagining will likely strip away the camp and replace it with a claustrophobic gothic family tragedy that makes the Baker family from Resident Evil 7 look normal. A massive narrative enhancement coming to Resident Evil Veronica is a deep dive into the tragic history of Rockford Island's inhabitants. In the original 2000 release, the island functioned primarily as a bleak immediate backdrop for Claire's escape, a stark prison complex quickly overrun by the undead. The remake, however, is set to significantly expand the environmental lore of the island before the biological outbreak completely decimated it. The development team is actively weaving in backstories detailing the everyday lives, institutional struggles, and fates of the people who lived and worked under the tyrannical shadow of the Ashford family. Players can expect to uncover rich, localized lore through hidden diaries and environmental storytelling that paints a vivid picture of a highly oppressive Umbrella facility. We'll see the perspectives of the island guards, the medical staff, and the terrified prisoners themselves, tracking how a seemingly secure military post gradually fractured from the inside due to Alfred Ashford's growing instability. Given that the RE2 and RE4 remake teams are running the show, how exactly will the physical gameplay, pacing, and classic sequences of Code Veronica transform under this new, aggressive design template? The original game featured several elements that desperately need modernization to fit into a grounded, terrifying third-person survival horror structure. The original Code Veronica was famously split into two halves: Claire's survival and escape from the military training facility on Rockford Island, followed by Chris Redfield's arrival to rescue her, which eventually takes both siblings to a desolate, frozen Umbrella research facility in Antarctica. Under the new philosophy where things are being shifted and transformed, we can expect the transition between these two locations to feel much more seamless and narratively justified. In the original, the Antarctic transition felt abrupt and suffered from intense backtracking, forcing players to leave items in item boxes for the other sibling to find later. The remake will likely overhaul this dual protagonist inventory system entirely. The shifting perspectives between Claire and Chris will be used to enhance narrative tension. Imagine Claire exploring the dark, frozen corridors of Antarctica, leaving physical, environmental clues, or altering the layout of the base through her actions, which Chris must later navigate using his military expertise. It's also mentioned that when it comes to the overall scale and volume of the content, fans of the original release can rest easy knowing that the reimagining is not compromising on scope. The producer explicitly noted that in terms of raw game content, Resident Evil Veronica will be similar, if not a bit longer, than the original game. One of the most exciting bombshells dropped by Hirabayashi during this Q&A is that the Code Veronica remake features explicit direct ties into later games in the franchise. The producer explicitly stated that there is a brand new through line built into Veronica's narrative that leads pretty directly into the events of Requiem. This is a massive departure from the original timeline, where Code Veronica was treated as a spin-off and more of a side story to the official narrative. To understand why this new through line is so revolutionary, we have to look at how jarring the transition was in the original timeline. In the original Code Veronica, Albert Wesker is revealed to be alive, working for a mysterious HCF organization. He obtains the T Veronica virus from Steve Burnside's corpse, fights Chris Redfield to a draw, and vows revenge against the Redfield siblings. It was an epic cliffhanger ending that set up a massive impending war between Wesker and the heroes. But then, Resident Evil 4 came out in 2005. Instead of continuing the thread of Wesker's war against Chris and Claire, Leon S. Kennedy was sent to a random village in Spain to rescue the president's daughter from a completely unrelated parasite called Las Plagas. Wesker was operating in the background via Ada Wong, but the T Veronica virus, Rockford Island, and Claire Redfield were barely mentioned. The massive momentum built up at the end of Code Veronica was completely sidelined. With the Veronica remake, Capcom is completely retrofitting the narrative to ensure the modern remake universe flows perfectly from one game to the next. So how could this actually look in game? In Resident Evil 4 Remake, we learn that Wesker is hunting for the dominant Las Plagas parasite to kickstart his ultimate plan Ouroboros, which culminates in Resident Evil 5. The new throughline in Veronica can show the exact moment Wesker realizes the limitations of the T Veronica virus. Perhaps Wesker observes Alexia Ashford's mutation and realizes that while the T Veronica virus grants incredible power, it requires either 15 years of cryogenic sleep or causes a complete loss of human sanity, as seen with Alexander. Wesker, a man obsessed with absolute control and perfection, would view the T Veronica virus as an imperfect tool. The remake could feature new lore documents, cutscenes, or dialogue where Wesker, upon realizing T Veronica's flaws, decides to shift his pursuits elsewhere. This turns Resident Evil Veronica into the literal prologue for Resident Evil 4, giving Wesker a definitive logical reason to send Ada Wong to Spain to secure a completely different biological weapon. In Resident Evil 7, 8, and 9, we were given tidbits throughout about the mysterious organization called the Connections, who were said to have control over the entire bioweapons underworld, though we never get a clear explanation as to who they are or how far their reach actually goes. It's possible that Resident Evil Veronica could also bridge this gap, giving us clear insight into who the Connections are if Capcom chooses to weave them into the story. But that is everything we got so far for Resident Evil Veronica. If you guys enjoyed, a like and sub would be really appreciated. And if you want to know more about Code Veronica, I just did a video explaining the full story of the original game, if you never got a chance to play the game yourself or if you just want a refresher. But take care, and I'll see you guys in a new one very soon.